I want your soul.
I looked at the little girl crying on the cracked sidewalk. Tears flowed from her cheeks like tiny pieces of diamonds. She ran across my front yard. As she got nearer, I recognized her. It was my neighbor's daughter, Miranda. I didn't really know my neighbors that well, but I had seen Miranda playing in the area. Miranda was only about 6 or 7 years old. A small blue-eyed girl with long blonde hair. She had pictures of cartoon characters on her little pajamas, but to my horror, I realized they were smeared with long streaks of blood over both her pants and shirt. She ran barefoot over the freezing cold winter ground. "Help me!" she screamed over and over as I watched through the window, feeling hypnotized. I didn't move for a long moment. Her tiny feet smacked against the icy ground with soft, rhythmic slaps. She sprinted up on my porch and began slamming her fists against the door. I startled, like a man waking up from a dream, running across the living room to let her in. "Help!" she cried as she collapsed in my arms. Her body felt so light. Her eyes began rolling up in her head as the frozen wind blew in through the open door past me. Flakes of snow whirled in random currents under the glare of the streetlights. Her teeth chattered. Her little body felt so cold. "They hurt Mommy and Daddy. Please don't let them hurt me." "Who did?" I asked, dragging her over to the couch and laying her down. She just lay silently now, however, and didn't even seem to hear me anymore. The snow continued to blow in through the open door. I went over to close it, looking out into the dark winter night. The streetlights started to flicker in rapid succession. Under the tinking and strobing of the street lamps, something tall and monstrous slinked towards the house. He looked like an extremely tall, thin man with blind white eyes and leathery black skin. The dark exterior of his glossy flesh almost made the creature look like he was wearing a tight black suit. The snow parted in front of him like Moses parting the sea. He towered over the bushes in the front of my yard. I guess the creature was at least 10 feet tall. His long skeletal legs seemed to creep forwards, tiptoeing on black claws as drops of blood fell from his faintly smiling mouth. His fingers looked like sharp pieces of obsidian bone. They formed into points like a stake. I slammed the door shut, turning the deadbolt. I looked at the little girl on the couch, but she was still unconscious, or perhaps just temporarily comatose from all the trauma she had endured. I went to the front window to look out into the dark winter night, but a visage from a nightmare was waiting there, only inches away. The tall creature's face morphed into a wide rictus grin when he saw me, crackling as his flesh pulled apart. His black skin gleamed like tanned leather, with no sign of any nose or ears. It seemed to have giant eyes, smooth reptilian skin, and a black hole of a mouth. With eyes as pure white as freshly cut marble, he peeked in through the window. It looked like the creature could barely contain his glee. His expression had an almost childish excitement, made ever more sinister by the emptiness radiating out through those blank, cataract eyes. They looked sunken and dark like the eye holes of a skull. He met my gaze. Something like an electric shock ran through my body. My heart felt like a graveyard, cold and dark. The abomination opened his mouth wide. In his gaping maw, dark violet light streamed and rippled in cyclonical whorls, always seeming to spin inwards toward the center. He spoke in a booming crash that seemed to come from all directions at once. His words had an eerie, wavering quality, like a voice caught between stations on the radio. "That little bitch is mine," he hissed. His jaw gnashed and bit as he spoke, but his mouth didn't move in time with his words. He reminded me of a wind-up toy I used to have as a kid, the way the lipless black mouth chattered, his alien skin shivering and vibrating. His gleaming white orbs of eyes grew wider and more excited, flicking in quick blurs to the left and right as they peeked through in the window. The purple effulgence streaming from his mouth in strange random currents seemed to intensify and brighten. Send her out, and all will be forgiven, mortal. I am a forgiving God, after all. And yet my wrath is as great as my love. You know what? Go fuck yourself, I snarled. His leathery lips split into a bloodthirsty, sadistic grin. You think you've won, but you haven't won anything, the creature thundered, his words shaking the floor like cannon blasts. I heard his breathing as it came quicker and more ragged. His expression grew simultaneously furious and gleeful. I am merely the first. I am the Black Messiah who marks the holy path, but the rest will soon follow. They come now from the world where the roads are paved with bones of little children like her. You'll regret not giving me that little bitch. You'll have plenty of time to regret it when we skin you alive. You'll die screaming, just like all the others. Remember this moment when the time comes. We will meet again. My prophecies are never made in vain, mortal. He turned and started to walk away back into the blizzard. I heard his crackling breath all around me, like the autumn wind blowing through dead leaves. There was a strange odor in the room as well. I could smell the odor radiating off the creature's glistening body, even through the window. It almost smelled like a mixture of lavender and sulfur. It was a smell I would quickly learn to fear, for every time it appeared, it marked the arrival of the Black Messiah, and hell followed with him. I ran upstairs and got my rifle after the encounter with the Black Messiah, grabbing a box of ammo and some extra magazines and sprinting back downstairs. I wasn't a very good shot. I occasionally went target shooting with my friends, but I hadn't gone out in a few years. I grabbed my cell phone and tried calling the police, but all service had gone down. I found the internet and TV also out. I swore under my breath as I went back downstairs to check on the girl. "Hello?" a small voice said from the living room. I saw Miranda sitting up on the couch. She had stopped crying. She sat there, pale and wide-eyed. When she saw me, a look of relief flooded over her face. "Oh, I thought you left me." She sounded like she might start crying again at any moment. I went over to her, grabbing her hand. It still felt freezing cold. "Well, I would never leave you alone here. I'm gonna get you to safety, I promise. I'm not gonna let those things take you." "What happened, though? I need to know everything." And she shrugged. "Well, there's not much to tell," she whispered, occasionally glancing toward the window as if expecting to see the boogeyman from her nightmares standing there. "I was sleeping in my bed and I heard my mom and dad start yelling. I thought they were arguing. I hid under my blanket and then I heard my mom scream. I started to tiptoe downstairs and I saw that tall man there. He stood over my mom. It looked like it was kissing her on the mouth. That purple stuff went into her when she breathed. The bad man was digging its fingers into her tummy and hurting her as she breathed. I saw my daddy in the corner, and he wasn't moving. He was hurt real bad, and he had blood all over his throat. I started screaming, and then that thing looked at me. It chased me. My mom was still rolling on the floor, and she sounded hurt. I saw your light across the street, and so I ran over here." She was shivering, her skin chalk white. Reliving the memory had started the flow of tears again. I then heard a slight rustling of sound. I looked over to the door and saw someone had surreptitiously slipped a piece of paper under it. The slashing marks of a black pen formed a chaotic medley of letters, written in giant capitalized letters. It looked like some sort of hostage note written by a mentally deranged kidnapper. I opened the door, looking out into the blizzard, and found it empty. I squinted, reading the strange note. It read, "There is one rule you must follow. Do not let them take the girl, under any circumstances. Even at the price of your own life, she is not what she seems. We'll be in touch." I immediately believed the note, though I couldn't say exactly why. Perhaps it was the strangeness of the night already. After meeting the Black Messiah through the window and seeing its alien face, my threshold for belief had been significantly lowered. At this point, I would not have been surprised to see Satan himself ride into town on a pale skeletal horse. I glanced over at the girl. She was staring directly at me now. She had stopped crying. A kind of calm acceptance seemed to have come over her, her face smoothed into a relaxed half-smile. I'm real glad you saved me." "Sorry I don't know your name," she said. "Me? I'm Brandon." I started watching her carefully. What the fuck did that note mean when it said she's not what she seems? I had seen this girl around here for years, although I had only talked to her once before today. When I first moved in, I had gone and introduced myself to her parents. She had come to the front door of their home as well, just as a small toddler waddling around with a diaper on. She smiled then, showing me her baby teeth poking up through her pink gums like weeds growing in a field. "My name Miranda," she said, and I had gotten down on my knees and squeezed her soft, warm cheeks. She was a cute little bugger, I remember thinking. "Hi," I responded enthusiastically. "Wow, you're really good at speaking." "And what's that on your shirt?" She looked down, then back up at me, grinning. "SpongeBob." And that was really all the interaction I ever had with her and her family, except for occasionally waving to them. Now her parents were almost certainly both dead, and trying to keep her alive had somehow become my problem. I smiled at her, trying to maintain a calming presence. I folded up the note and carefully slipped it into my pocket. "It's going to be okay, Miranda," I said, thinking fast. "Here's what we're going to do, okay?" And she leaned forward and listened intently. "We're going to get in my SUV, it's 4-wheel drive, and we're just going to get out of here, okay? I'll take the gun. We'll drive to the state police barracks, and there will be lots of people there who can help us." She nodded, looking so small and helpless. "I have some clothes that might fit you upstairs. My niece visited here a few months ago and I still have her shoes and stuff. She looks about your size." As quickly as I could, I ushered her upstairs and got her dressed in a warm coat, extra clothes, and shoes, even though they were definitely too big for her. After she put on 3 pairs of thick socks, though, she could walk without the shoes constantly falling off her feet. I grabbed the gun, the ammo, and some drinks, and went out into the garage. We opened the door and drove out into the night. We drove out into mortal danger, in the midst of the freezing winds that howled all around us in fury, like the cries of a banshee. As we passed Miranda's house, I noticed that all the lights were still on. I glanced over, seeing a tall skeletal silhouette in the glow of the window. It stood as still as a statue. Goosebumps rose over my skin as I saw purple light radiating around the figure. I hit the gas and didn't look back, praying that we would get out of this town before more of those things started arriving. The roads were not in good shape, covered with thick layers of ice and a fresh covering of wet snow. Giant, soggy flakes flew all around us in spiraling whirls, making the visibility terrible. I couldn't see more than 10 or 15 feet in front of the car whether I used the high beams or the driving lights. Though I had the heat on, Miranda sat shivering in the passenger seat. I glanced over at her, seeing a shell-shocked little girl staring out blankly into the distance. She had a look in her eyes I had only seen in pictures of soldiers returning from lethal war zones or unspeakable atrocities. "How you doing?" I asked, and she jumped as my voice shattered the silence. "I miss my mom and dad," she said simply, then turned back to looking off into a faraway abyss. We hadn't gone far when I saw headlights ahead of us. We were only a minute or so down the street from the house, and the going was slow. I braked suddenly, skidding a few feet across the slick road. In front of us, a truck was parked diagonally across both lanes of the road. Someone had left it running. Large plumes of thick dark exhaust steamed out of its muffler. The driver's side window was smashed. Safety glass glittered on the street like glittering stars in infinite space. But I saw no one inside the vehicle. I swore under my breath. We couldn't get by without either getting out and moving it or trying to go around it, which would involve driving into snowbanks 6 inches deep and most likely getting stuck. What kind of asshole leaves his car like that, goddammit? I asked, furious, swearing. But the smashed window gave me chills. I rolled down my window, sticking my head out and searching the street. On both sides of us, bare dead trees had their snow-covered branches extended up to the sky like emaciated arms raised in prayer. "Don't," Miranda whispered softly. I looked over at her, but she wasn't looking at me. I saw her wide, terrified eyes staring out the open driver's window, staring at something behind me. I quickly spun my head, seeing a face on a skeletal body zooming towards me in a blur. It radiated purple light from its eyes and open mouth, its sharp claws of feet slapped against the frozen ground. Opening its mouth wide, it shrieked in a shrill cacophony of pure hunger. I saw a face there, only inches away from my own now. Its eyes looked like spiral galaxies of streaming violet light, quickly flowing inwards like water running down a drain. The way its mouth stretched, as its blank eyes shone, reminded me of the man from Edvard Munch's The Scream, except instead of existential horror, this creature's face radiated insanity, and its gaze scorched me. Its claws flew up in a blur, latching onto the sides of my head. I felt them bite deeply into the flesh. My head felt like it was in a vice, and I screamed in pain. "You'll die for your insolence," the creature rasped. "The Black Messiah now brings 1,000 of Hell's shock troopers to destroy this town. The girl will never escape." I felt streams of warm blood running down my head. Miranda yelled out in a powerful voice that was nothing like the voice of a small girl. "Release him," she cried, her voice thundering through the car. It sounded ancient. The creature's hands flew off my head. It soared backwards through the air as if someone had thrown an anvil at it. I quickly started to turn the car around, doing a 3-point turn and rolling my window up. I kept wiping blood off my forehead and out of my eyes. As my headlights shone toward the woods, I saw the truck's driver. His naked skin body was hanging crucified on a tree. The bloody muscle gleamed like the moonlight off the snow. All around him, dozens more of those creatures with the purple light in their eyes and gaping, shrieking mouths were approaching. Miranda had returned to a nearly hysterical state by this point. The powerful ancient voice I had heard seemed like a dream. Now she sat crying, the tears sparkling on her face like tiny stars. "Why won't they leave us alone?" she asked, and I wondered the same thing. "I don't know," I responded simply, "but we're okay now." I seriously doubted that, though. I had a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, and no matter how fast I tried to drive through the snow, I still felt eyes constantly watching me. I pulled out of there, driving as fast as I could, but the roads were slick, and we only got a few miles before I felt the tires slide out from under me. Miranda gave a scream as my eyes widened in shock. The car began to spin off the road. I saw a giant tree approaching, and I tried turning the wheel slightly, but it kept fishtailing, and I missed the tree by inches. Behind it, a boulder a few feet tall hid under the snow, its rounded top peeking out. With a tortured rending of metal, the car smashed into the boulder, and then we were stranded. "Are you okay?" I asked Miranda. The car's engine ticked like a slowing pendulum. Plumes of hot exhaust rose out of the crushed engine like the last breaths of a dying man. Miranda looked stunned but unhurt. "No, no, no," Miranda said, crying. "I don't want to be here anymore." I put my hand on her shoulder when a subtle smell seemed to fill the car. something cloying and eerie behind the pungent odors of gasoline and car exhaust. I then checked the rearview mirror and had to repress an urge to scream. Dozens of those things were only 20 feet behind us. They swept forward like a dark wind. Their purple effulgence streamed through the snow like moonlight through the clouds. In the lead, I saw the Black Messiah with his frozen rictus grin and his dead white eyes. Those eyes seemed to approach us like headlights, shining bright in the whiteness of the landscape. "Shit," I swore, grabbing the gun. "Get out, Miranda, run. Don't look back." I flung the door open. She climbed out of the car, the smacking of her little shoes making dull thudding sounds against the snow. We followed the road. Behind us we heard laughing and singing. The eerie voices all had a wavering staccato quality, like a radio station with bad reception. "The girl will die tonight," the Black Messiah screamed as we sprinted away. Though he and his followers didn't run, their long alien legs pushed them forwards in a blur. No matter how fast we ran, they gained on us just walking at a leisurely pace. I glanced back, meeting the eyes of the Black Messiah for a brief moment. The followers in the back had women and children from our town with metal shackles around their necks. The followers held the chains in their hands as if they were walking dogs. The prisoners looked bloody and vacant-eyed, and some showed signs of torture. Then there was a screech of tires and a flood of headlights that broke through the storm like a crashing wave. Miranda and I jumped toward the side of the road. The car flew past and plowed some of the followers of the Black Messiah. The leader himself missed getting crushed by mere inches. The Black Messiah opened his mouth and a gout of purple flame leapt out. It soared through the air like a fiery spear and crashed through the back window of the car. The safety glass shattered into a million tiny pieces. The smell of ozone was overpowering. I then raised the gun and looked through the scope. I fired at the nearest of followers, emptying the magazine. I missed over half the shots, but I felt a surge of energy when I killed a few. Their heads disintegrated into exploding blossoms of gore. The car spun 180 degrees on the snow, its tires sliding as it crushed the bodies of more followers. They leapt and danced out of the way in their own strange ways, moving in a blur towards the woods. The dying ones groaned on the ground as the purple light in their faces slowly died, like a candle sputtering and going out. The Black Messiah sent another spear of fiery energy, flying toward the out-of-control car, but it only gouged the top of the roof, leaving a mark like a bullet which just grazed the skin. The car pulled up next to me and Miranda, the passenger window already half rolled down. A woman sat in the driver's seat, her eyes wild, her face chalk white. Her dark eyes seemed to look through me. The doors unlocked with a click, and she screamed through the window, "Get in!" We didn't hesitate. I heard the roaring of the Black Messiah behind us. A purple spear soared through the air heading toward me and Miranda. I pushed her forward, then fell on top of her as it flew over our heads. Then, I grabbed her small hand and pulled her up. We got into the car. The Black Messiah had rallied his remaining troops and was now approaching, still grinning, still fearless. With a screech of rubber, the woman flew away, going far too fast for the conditions. "Thank God you saved us," I said, looking over at her light Irish skin, her black hair and robe. "Why did you save us, though?" "Do you know what Gnosticism is?" the woman in the robe asked, a seeming non sequitur. I shook my head, watching the trees fly by in a blur. "No, sorry." She sighed. "My name's Brandon and this is Miranda," I began saying, but she cut me off. "I know who you are," she said as she drove. "I'm a member of Miranda's church, let's say. I was sent to protect her. My name is Mina." "Well, thank God you saved us, Mina," I said, but she acted like she hadn't heard me. "Have you ever read the Bible?" Mina asked, and I nodded. Have you ever wondered about the differences between the Old Testament and the New Testament? God seems like an insane, vindictive psychopath in the Old Testament, after all. He regularly destroys whole civilizations and even flooded the world, like a child destroying a toy he has grown bored of. God even tells his followers to rule witches and gays in cold blood. Yet in the New Testament, God appears forgiving, loving, and compassionate. In the person of Christ, he is wise, patient, and willing to die for others. Yeah, so maybe it's just different sides of his personality, I said, and Mina gave a thin smile that showed the whites of her teeth. Well, that's one answer, but there's another one. Gnosticism is an ancient Christian sect considered heretical by the mainstream churches, because Gnostics believe in two gods, and they think that the God of the Old Testament is not the same as the God embodied by Christ. According to the Gnostics, in the beginning, we were all spirits made of light. Our consciousness was eternal, and we would never age or die. We were divine sparks of the eternal Godhead, and still are, according to the Gnostics, except a veil has been placed over our eyes, a material veil, a prison in the shape of a universe. Yet, originally, we were all one with Sophia, the infinite goddess of love and light that has always existed. But there was another god, a male creator god that some call the Demiurge. This is the god worshipped by the Abrahamic religions, though these regions may call him Yahweh, Allah, or Jehovah. He came out of Sophia, but over time, he forgot the true nature of reality. He convinced himself he was the only God, that he always had been. For Sophia had made a great error in creating his son. He was only a shadow of the heavenly light that had preceded him. He had fallen down into a lower state through his ignorance and insanity. A lower state that we know as physical matter and energy. He was spiritless, though still extremely powerful, just like his mother. He could create existence by simply willing it, just as the original, pure Godhead of Sophia did. This being was called various names, including Yaldabaoth or Samael, which means the blind god. Our church has always called it by the former, however. From his mind over endless eons, he made other beings, archons, who would control the material world. Some people call them archangels or other names, but don't be deceived. These are emanations of Yaldabaoth, and they are just as sadistic and emotionless as the Creator God. Yaldabaoth was able to trap the spirits of eternal light into bodies made of meat and imprison them in a material universe where they would continually suffer, age, and die. As soon as they shed one body, they would go on to another one to start the suffering all over again. And Yaldabaoth, either because he is malevolent or because he is insane, rejoices. But the original pure Godhead returned in the form of Jesus Christ to remind human beings that they are eternal beings of light, who were there at the beginning of time. He taught us of the divine spark within the hearts of all beings, the oneness that transcends time and matter. Christ wanted to bring the knowledge of the infinite soul back to all beings, so that they could awaken and escape this prison of a universe. For that, Yaldabaoth had Christ killed, but Christ was able to use his true nature to escape death and leave his flesh body behind, like a hermit crab abandoning a shell. After the message was delivered, Christ returned to the source, to Sophia, the Godhead, the being of infinite wisdom and light. Miranda's parents were members of one of the few surviving Gnostic sects, descended from the Cathars themselves, who were burned alive by the Catholic Church for their beliefs. The sect believed that Miranda is the second coming, that she has Sophia within her just as Christ did. Within her mind, she has her mortal, childish mind, but deep within there's another being, an ancient one of endless love and power. That being wants the final battle between good and evil to begin, so it can end the atrocities once and for all. Yaldabaoth knows this, so he is sending his abominations to this world now to take the town and kill the child. From there, they will probably move and take more power across the country and eventually the world. Once the blind followers have been unleashed, this Pandora's box of destruction cannot be contained again. Many people will die. She turned quickly, pulling into a random house on a side road. I looked up at it, seeing all the lights on. "This is a safe house," Mina said. Miranda then gave me a questioning look. "Come on, let's go." We entered into an old, light blue Victorian home, its sharp turrets covered in a frosting of snow and ice. The place smelled like dust and old books. The heat and bright light in the front hallway felt refreshing, however. "I know this place," Miranda said, giving me a faint smile. "This is where the church meets." And Mina nodded. Indeed, this is a place where gnostics come together to transmit the teachings and gain divine wisdom. We have reinforcements on the way, coming from states all around the area. But the snow? Well, it's not helping. I'm not sure when they're supposed to get here. Mina looked anxious and uncertain, and yet her eyes remained cold and black, smoldering like coals. "So what then?" I asked. "Are they going to fight those things? There could be thousands of them by now. I don't even understand where they're coming from." "They move through the thin parts between worlds," Mina said. "With the help of the archons, the demonic archangels who control the worlds and the gates between. But there is a limit to—" Her voice was suddenly cut off by an inhuman wailing from outside. Mina's eyes widened in shock. Miranda started shaking. She grabbed my hand, gripping it tightly. I squeezed, looking down at her reassuringly. I didn't feel that reassurance in my own heart, though. That wail had sent an ice pick of fear through my chest. I looked out the window, seeing something long and black with many skittering legs. Its body stretched halfway across the yard. It looked like an enormous centipede, its scales shimmering like obsidian. 2 giant eyes on stalks rose from its head, as black as empty space. On its back, the Black Messiah rode, his lunatic smile still plastered on his face. Mina pulled out a holstered pistol, and I slammed a fresh magazine into the rifle. Chanting came from the front yard. Followers of the Black Messiah appeared through the thick snow like vampires crawling out of the mist. The Black Messiah crashed his centipede monster into the front of the house. I saw the kitchen wall shatter. Wood and bricks rained down as the house shook. The trampling feet of the giant creature felt like the aftershocks of an earthquake. I then smelled gas from the stove. Behind it, I smelled the Black Messiah's reek, the lavender and sulfur notes mixed in with the gas. I realized the Black Messiah had broken one of the natural gas lines. It now flooded into the house. Miranda and I reached the back of the house and huddled against the wall. Mina stood in front of us protectively, her pistol extended, ready to begin firing at any moment. The Black Messiah came around the hallway, riding his stallion from hell. It skittered and writhed in a blur towards us. Behind it, dozens of fanatical followers streamed in, the purple light giving the half-destroyed house an eerie glow. Mina then turned to us, whispering, and she revealed an M67 fragmentation grenade in her pocket. "These guns aren't enough to fight against such creatures," she said, "but the Black Messiah burst the gas line, and I can smell it. I will not let it take Sophia from this world again. You must run, right now. The door outside is directly behind you. Go." Miranda and I turned and ran through the door as Mina opened fire with her gun. The creatures hissed in fury. I looked back as we sprinted through the backyard, seeing her pull the pin on the grenade and run forward. The centipede creature's pincers worked furiously as it lunged for her face. Then the house erupted into a mushroom cloud of flames and thick choking smoke. The eye of the fire seemed to dance and ripple as it spread. We ran into the woods, blindly following deer trails. We must have hiked for at least a couple hours. Miranda was tired and complaining, and we had to take a lot of breaks. I was just happy I had dressed her warmly at the house, for she would have surely frozen to death by now if I had not. We both felt a deep sense of appreciation for Mina and her sacrifice. Miranda had known her and was extremely sad. Eventually, we saw the glare of a light streaming in through the trees. With a surge of hope, I realized a house lay directly ahead of us. I ran toward it with Miranda at my side, and she laughed. "We made it, we're out," she said enthusiastically. I kept slamming my fist against the thick wooden door until some bleary-eyed man came and unlocked it. I told him that I had an emergency and needed to call the police. He nodded and motioned us both inside. While we escaped, I know that the mindless fanatics of Yaldabaoth are not far behind us. They will never stop until they take the girl. We keep moving from one town to the next now, but sometimes I think I smell the subtle odor of lavender and sulfur rising up through the vents. And I have to repress my urge to scream.